Let's talk about this now with lead researcher at the Benchmark Foundation, David van Wyk. David, good to have you, and thank you very much for your time. 13 years on, the family is still asking for accountability. In fact, some of them even considering now going to the courts to get the current president to apologize.
Well, I think, yes, it's 13 years on. The Parliament Commission has sat. Parliament Commission cost an awful lot of money, took a very long time to come to its conclusions and to make its report. And from that report, I think we've had the National Commissioner of Police and the Provincial Deputy Commissioner of Police being fired from their jobs, but that's about the only thing that happened. The mining company has basically focused on 16 out of the 44 victims of that week's events. And, the community of Wonderkop, where the actual massacre took place, where the koppie is located, feel that they have been largely excluded from the process, even though they bore the brunt of the massacre and the fallout from the massacre afterwards. I took photographs of leaking drains in that community in 2007 in a report that we published then. We published a second report in 2012, just before the massacre, and I took pictures of exactly the same drains spilling over. And now in 2025, I went to the exact same spot and found the same sewage still spilling, which means that there's absolutely nothing that was done in that community. The roads are still as terrible as they used to be. The housing is just as appalling as it used to be. The river is still being polluted. The air is still being polluted. The air monitoring stations, there were 2 air monitoring stations, one in Wonderkop and one in the Marikana Recreation Center or near the church. And both of those monitoring stations do not work, so people don't know what is going into the air in the area. But people are complaining that their eyes are burning, that they are coughing, and that they feel unhealthy as a consequence of the smelter and processing plant that is there. Apart from that, many of the people who are there actually now tell us that Lonman was better than the current owner of the mine. Yeah. The sports facilities that used to be there are no longer there. The recreation facilities that used to be there are no longer there. There are big signs saying up that the mine is supporting internet to the schools, but the teachers tell us that there are no computer center in the schools. Well, what's the use of having internet if you don't have a computer center at the school? People are complaining about what is happening in education. They're complaining about the fact that the mine hospital is not open to the community and that the community only has access to a day clinic when it's a very violent community, given the levels of unemployment and worker retrenchments that have taken place in the area, and the fact that many of the workers are living in zinc shacks now, whereas formerly they were living in hostels.
Yeah. So you say, the mining companies continue to make significant profits from selling that resource at the expense of the people there. What is the government prepared to do at this point as far as the reforms that have been called for, as far as mining operations are concerned? We understand the process of compensation and those that were appointed to regulate that particular process. And of course, there could be more challenges to that particular process. But as far as overall reform of the sector?
Well, the government has the role of oversight, but the Marikana renewal program is really just a publicity stunt. Something like 97%, 98% of our respondents indicated that they've never heard of the Marikana renewal program. And this is in a community right next to the mine. And people say, 97% of respondents say that they've never been consulted by the mine. This is in the community right next door to the mine. We found that the projects of that renewal program are all located very far away from the community that was most affected. That is completely unacceptable. The workers in the mine feel completely unsafe. They cannot actually report sick for work. They say they will be fired. They are deadly scared of the mine management, and they also say they cannot report on unsafe working conditions for fear of being fired as well, which is actually illegal to threaten people who complain about conditions being unsafe, being victimized.
So you said there used to be 30,000 workers. The mine came in and decided, look, we're going to change the hostels and turn them into family accommodation. This has resulted with only 3,000 that could be accommodated. What happens to the rest of them?
Well, exactly. The rest of them moved into the informal settlement of Nakani, with this living out allowance thing, which the government should not allow at all. Government should force mining companies to apply the same housing standards as they apply in Australia, Canada, and the United States. I don't see why South African workers should be subjected to informal settlements or squatter camps to live in which there is no water. The water comes on at 12 o'clock at night because the water pressure is so bad as a result of the mine consuming the water that comes in from Magali's water to that area. So you have to stay awake until 12 o'clock at night before you can get a bucket of water in a communal tap in the street. Now, those are not the kind of conditions that mine workers should be living in. If CEOs globally can get the same income, in fact, South African CEOs get more than Australian and American CEOs, I don't see why workers can't get the same. I think it's a system of global apartheid that applies in the South African mining industry.
So what is a system you're saying that need to be put in place, and where do we begin so that you get that sense of housing parity?
Well, I think that the Department of Mineral Resources should see its function as regulating mining instead of promoting mining. That's the first step. That's where we should start. We should also say that mining, like all other businesses, should be subject to other departments. Right after the massacre, I spoke to the Department of Labor and asked them why they didn't intervene. They said, it's not their competence. It's the Department of Mineral Resources competence. Now, if I speak to the health department, I get the same response, or the environmental department. They say, no, those are the competencies of DMRE. DMRE is a super department which allows a free-for-all in the mining industry instead of regulating it properly. We should actually make mining subject to all the departments of government like all other businesses are. They should not be a super industry or a super sector of the economy.
If we are to indeed get to the root causes of the 2012 unrest, what are the findings of the Farlam Commission saying we need to address?
Well, I think the strike started on the far western belt of the Platinum Belt and moved gradually towards Marikana. Anglo Platinum settled with their workers. Impala Platinum settled with their workers. Then when the workers came to Aquarius, there were 3 workers shot and 12 wounded on the 2nd of August, and then it got to Marikana, and the management there absolutely refused to talk to the workers. I think that Bishop Josie Yorka went out to the striking workers that morning when they were killed, before they were killed. He spoke to them. They said, Bishop, please go to management and ask them for water and food and tell them we would like to talk to them. We would like to negotiate. When he got to management, they said, they don't negotiate with criminals. And then the first shots went off and someone phoned the bishop and told him, Bishop, we are being shot at. Now, that's not the way to deal with labor. We should stop dealing with labor with militarized security. We should engage with labor to see what are the issues that are confronting them and then try and deal with those particular issues in a meaningful and constructive manner.
As far as reparations are concerned, I mean, the process at some point was opened and some families, I believe, did receive some reparations. And then thereafter, what has happened to that process? Has it been closed? I think some 170 million would have been paid from government's reporting.
Well, I think that two things. The mine seems to concentrate only on 16 workers, and those were 16 workers who were not participating in the strike, but workers who were the private security and so on, rather than focusing on all 44 workers and focusing on the whole community that lives in absolute squalor and poverty, which is where the roots of the problem was. The other thing which is really problematic for me is that they gave jobs to the widows of mine workers. And the women tell us, I don't want to work in a space where my husband died. I'm reminded every day of his death. They should have paid me compensation. They could have paid me his wages for the rest of his work time until he became a pensionable worker. And then I would have been able to look after my family in the Eastern Cape instead of coming to the mine. Who is looking after my children in the Eastern Cape while I'm working here? You see, it's also in Australia, Canada, and the United States. They will never give the widow of a worker who died on the mine his job. They will give her proper compensation and look after her children and so on.
Yeah.
Again, I don't see why it is that in Africa, workers are treated so differently than what they are treated in Australia, Canada, and the United States.
Yeah, David, I appreciate your time. Thanks so much for coming on, a lead researcher at the Benchmark Foundation, with some recommendations there, saying that one of the things that need to be dealt with is equal housing standards for mine workers globally, and full reparations for all families, eliminate the living out allowance and invest in dignified housing to overcome the proliferation of informal settlements.